As you probably by now know, I'm not a heating engineer. You know what I do, cars, boats and a bit of home automation stuff. So if you watch the video where I turned the dumb thermostat into a smart one using these Wi-Fi switches, there was a moment where I just said ignore that pump that was missing. But it's become a bit interesting, so I'm going to do a really short one just on that pump because it's very odd. So this pump had ceased, it had stopped operating when we got this working. It was making a buzzing noise but not spinning. Now, quite often, okay, I'm not a heating engineer, but I have some experience with these heating pumps because I'm a homeowner and these things happen. Occasionally they do get stuck, and if you take this big screw off, underneath there's a little slot for a screwdriver, and when they're powered on you can just give it a kick with a screwdriver and they usually spin up again. And what normally happens is it's a bit of scale or a bit of grit that's just got stuck in there and it just needs a kick and it gets it going again. So this one wouldn't do that, wouldn't kick off the screwdriver. So my assumption then was, right, we'll take it apart and I bet in here we find it full of scale and rubbish and gunk. But it's not. This is a very odd failure, and we'll go back to my workshop where I've got the rotor and we'll have a look at this because it's really weird. Here are then two parts of a three-part pump. That's the first bit we saw earlier that was attached to the wall. Here's the second bit, which is the casing and contains the stator of the motor. And this is the bit that you're kind of probably familiar with and you will have seen on your own home central heating. So inside here, this is the stator of the motor. There are the windings. And this is, it's called an AC induction motor. And one of the nice things about an induction motor is that there is no electrical connection to the rotor, the third part of this three-part pump. So there are no slip rings and there are no brushes. There's nothing to wear out, but more importantly, because it's a water pump, there is no electrical connection to that rotor because the rotor is immersed in your hot water, your heating hot water. So the rotor, here it is. Can't actually see the rotor because it's encased inside this metal case, which is called the cartridge. Here's the working part of the pump. It's an impeller. So this spins and the water goes in the middle here, from here, and centrifugal force just literally throws it outwards and it comes out of these little slots here and goes up. There's a slot there and out there. So this should be absolutely free moving. You can hear it's not. Now, okay, that's not in itself entirely unusual because sometimes what happens, to say you've got the rotor is inside this case and you can see we've got some scale and some build up. So what normally happens is you get a bit of scale or something and it just interferes with the spinning rotor on the outside of that case. But when I took it apart and I was just rotating it in my hand, I felt something a bit weird. I have never seen anything like this in my life. I'm not a heating engineer. Yeah, maybe this is a common failure mode for these things, but certainly apart from this pump, I've never seen this in any other pump or electric motor or generator. It's very, look, right, where I've drawn my pen on there. Something is rubbing in here, and it has rubbed so much that it has almost rubbed through this casing to the extent that you can see. Can you see that? You can see the internals rubbing through. So that piece of metal there must be so thin, it must literally be like a bit of tin foil. I can actually see the internals, and if you press it with your finger you can deform it. Can't get that on video, can you? But it's, oh, there we go, look, see? I shouldn't be able to do that. This is a piece of steel. This is, this is a solid bit of steel, so there's no way I should be able to do that. So what we're going to do, if I can, is take the rotor out of its cartridge assembly. Now, according to YouTube, you should just be able to poke it and it comes out, but this one is well and true. No, I'm pulling it out of the vise. Well and truly stuck in there. So I've got to find some way of holding this whilst I bash it from the back, whilst obviously not crushing the case. So let's see what we can do. Right, plan A, which probably isn't going to work. As you can see, I've set it up in the vise, and what I'm doing, it's bearing just on these edges, and they're quite thin, so I think there's a chance we're going to bend this. It doesn't matter because this is scrap. I can't reuse this because of the wear. So even if we pull this out and we can clean it up, this this is rubbish because it's too far gone. Incidentally, you may remember at the very, very beginning, I said there was a little screw in the back you can use to kickstart it. There is the little screw in the back. I don't know if you can see it, can you? There we go. See, and that sometimes you can just you can just kickstart them. It's obviously known that these things can jam up because why have they got a screw there? That's too much. Yeah, we'll just do it like that, right? Now let's see if we can tap this out without it just collapsing. Gosh. That's in there. That is really in there. Let's get a bigger hammer. I've got a bigger hammer, so we'll try a bigger hammer. See what happens. Wow. It breaks. That's what happens. Gosh. So the impeller has snapped off, the shaft has snapped. So I don't care because this thing is scrap anyway. Interestingly, well, not interestingly, predictably, it's bent all of that as well. But it's interesting, isn't it? What's in there? How do we get that out then? Very strange. So I think let's wind this in because now I can bear. Yeah, I can put it right on there actually. We can do it like that. There. And let's continue bashing then and see what happens. Well, something's coming out. Many things have come out in bits, which is not what I was expecting, to be honest. Apparently this thing should come out as you should be able to pull out the rotor as an assembly, and obviously what bits have we got? It's all just bits of shaft by the look of it, which are plastic, ceramic. It's got a ceramic shaft. Well, how very odd. Right, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep seeing if I can find a way into this. I'll put the camera back on if I can find anything. So increasing amounts of destructive force are employed. Ultimately, we ended up just with a hacksaw and cut the thing in half because there was no way it was going to come out with a drift or a punch or anything. So here is the offending bit. I cut it just on the edge there because the bit where it was worst was this bit here. So we will see. I've got gloves on because I actually cut my finger while I was hacksawing because of course I've now got a sharp metal edge here. So we're gonna start messing with that. So this should motion. Wow. So that looks like it's a slither of metal, isn't it? Look, well, I don't know what it's been, but there's a slither of metal in there, and that definitely shouldn't be there. Very, very, very thin. Ignore this top line here is where I used the hacksaw to cut it. You can actually just see the windings, the bars inside the rotor there. How very strange. That's a mess in there, isn't it, Lou? Can you see all that? I don't know if you can see it with this light. Let me get some better light, hang on. Well, that has absolutely torn up the insides of there. Can you see all that metal that's been rubbed away? This is just as I've disassembled it. I've not cleaned it or touched it or anything. There's still a bit of plastic in the bottom there. Look at the state of that. All those metal shavings and... Well, I have no idea how that failure mode will have initiated. You can kind of see how it's propagated because as it's scraped more and more and more, but why was it so much bigger in the first place? Interesting. Interestinger and interestinger. So I think what's happened is quite straightforward but weird. Here's the impeller and here's the housing, and that's not a bearing. You describe it as a bush, I guess. And there is, when that's back in, there's a... Can you see that? There's a fair amount of radial play in that. And I guess it was just enough that it's just rubbed and rubbed and rubbed away. The rotor's rubbed and rubbed away on the case. But this is going to be difficult to show, but here is the thin bit. I mean, that's really thin. You can see I can just push that with my finger. Shouldn't be able to do that, it's steel. If we go around here, it's a lot stiffer. And I don't know if you can actually see. It's like tin foil. But this is thinner. The material is a lot thinner. It's almost broken through here than, for example, up here. So there we go. That's it really, because now I've got no option but to buy a new pump and fit a new pump and put it back in, and then that will be the end of that. So there you go. If you ever wonder why your central heating pump stops working and it doesn't start again from just kicking on that screw, then there's a possibility, I suppose, that the front bearing has worn maybe, and it's chewed itself to bits on the inside. There we go.